travel with me into the storyland. 2000 years ago, in the great land of China, there stood this small, beautiful mountain village called Homura. Homura had small huts made of bamboos, and the roof of these huts looked like twirled mustaches of men. In this Homura village, there was Shia, the woodcutter. He was an old man with white beard who had lost his wife at a very young age when Wasi, their only child, came into their life. Wasi, from a small boy, grew later into a tall, handsome young man with deep blue eyes and flowing hair. My dear Toastmasters, friends, and guests, let me tell you not the story of Wasi, but the story of Mia, the daughter of the village merchant who fell in love with Wasi. There were resistance, despite all the resistances from the family members and the village head. Mia convinced her father to get married to Wasi, and the wedding day was decided. The entire Homura village was decorated with ribbons of red, blue, and silver. The sweet fragrance of the wedding suite reached every nook and corner of the village. Let me take a pause here, friends, and tell you that this was also the time that King Ming, the brutal tyrant, ruled the great land of China. He used to attack villages mainly to capture resources and enslave men for the great wall he was building across the northern part of China. He probably wanted to flank it to the other states. So unfortunately, this was exactly the day of the wedding was when the army troops marched into this beautiful village of Homura. Villagers stood in shock as the soldiers entered the wedding party. The swords and the spears flew left and right. Men who tried to resist were killed. Women were brutally raped in front of their family members. Young kids, crying, experienced the bitter taste of human blood when it splashed onto their lips. In the middle of all, miraculously, Mia escaped. In fact, the priest helped her escape into the village temple. But unfortunately, Wasi was captured and taken as a slave. So when Mia came out during the sunset, she could see the blood seeping into the village soil. She could not believe what just happened to the beautiful day of her life. She stood in shock. But she was determined. She was determined not to stay in a place where her love was not there. She decided to go to the place where the soldiers went. It was the Great Wall of China that was getting built. The long journey started. She had carried an extra sweater, thinking during their return she could give it to Wasi. Every day she used to look into the mountain and started walking. The only change in her journey was that the green pastures to the sides later turned into forest, and the forest to rocky mountains. There were days where she could experience the cold water as she crossed shallow streams and rivers. In the night, it was even more scary. She was walking all alone, and the moonlight was her only guide. So after days and weeks of this long, tiring journey, she finally reached the place where the soldiers and the slaves were. As she entered into the space, she could hear that clamoring voice and the sounds of the metals falling on the stone, the screams of the slaves and the shouts of the soldiers. In the middle of all this, she was looking for Wasi. As she started running around, suddenly she was caught by a young man. This was Rokoku, the childhood friend of Wasi. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, she looked up to Mia and said, "Mia, stop running." And he pointed his finger to the direction. Mia just looked there and she could not believe what just happened. Wasi was lying lifeless in a pool of blood. She ran and held Wasi's body to hers and started crying. She cried, wept and lamented like nobody ever lamented before. Seeing this, the entire villagers stood in shock. Even the soldiers were moved to tears. Soon the story reached the ears of King Ming, and he arrived at the place. His brutality was not just over. He's sensing the situation, and with a tinge of lust in his eyes, he asked Mia to be his concubine. Mia, with a stern look, looked into the emperor's eyes and said, "I can be willingly yours, only on one condition. If you give Wasi the royal funeral, the funeral only given to the commanders of the army." The king, for a moment, thought it was a big ask, but as in the wave of lust, he yielded in. Soon a golden coffin was brought in. Wasi's body was placed in this coffin with a silk robe, and it was closed with a silver lid, and the soldiers slowly lowered this lid into the river from the bridge. All the soldiers stood in line and gave a standing salute, as was the tradition. When the coffin touched the water, Mia once again looked into the emperor's eyes and said, "I had lost my life the moment when I saw Wasi lying lifeless. But my heart was still beating. It was beating only for this moment, to see a grand farewell and a funeral given to my love. You, Emperor, you are small. You are too small a being to stand between our love." Saying this, instantly she jumped into the river, and the villagers stood in shock. But what actually astonished them was when this body entered this river. They could see the color of the river changing from blue to yellow, from yellow to pale yellow to murky yellow, and very soon it was a stream of gold that they could see in front of their eyes. 2000 years later, my dear friends, the village of Homura do not exist, but the yellow river still flows through the heartland of China. And there stands this small shrine on the shores of the river, respecting and honoring their love. And it is said that one beautiful golden fish on every full moon night swims to the shores of this river, and on the same day a special star sparkles in the sky. Like some of the sincere soldiers did on that day, let me also give a standing salute to this tale of love from the land of China.